So thank you everyone for being here. I'm really excited to get to moderate this panel. I think we're going to have a really good discussion. Coming from the PUC, when I was working on state policy, the struggle was always how do we create the right environment for innovation to happen? Because from the government, you can't necessarily make that happen, but you can create the right setting for that and encourage the right behavior. I think we're going to learn. We have a diversity of speakers on our panel today with very different roles, and I hope we can really get into a good Q&A session and learn about some of the innovation that's happening at your local governments. So with that, I will introduce our panelists. So we have Leah D Singh. D Singh. Leah D Singh is the Chief Innovation Officer at the City of Riverside. She manages a team of 60 very talented information technology professionals. She also serves as the Executive Director of Smart Riverside, which is a nonprofit that aims to narrow the digital divide in her region by empowerment through education and technology. Leah's professional experience includes 30 years in IT and 18 years are specific to local government. She holds a master's degree in public administration and a BS in information science. And she's also written and spoken extensively on career advice, social media, cybersecurity, and technology and government. So welcome, Leah.
Thank you. Thanks.
And to my left, we have Barry Hooper. Barry manages the existing commercial buildings energy ordinance in San Francisco, which requiring annual benchmarking of energy performance and an action plan for cost-effective efficiency improvement. He leads the development of the San Francisco Green Building Code, including efficiency and solar requirements, and serves on the Green Team awarding priority permitting incentives to LEED Platinum projects. And then finally, we have Christopher Malone. Christopher is currently a senior market analyst with Southern California Edison. His work includes managing SCE's public sector strategic plan work, the SCEC partnership, and assisting with the development of SCE's, so many letters here, SCE's public sector business plan. Previously, Chris was with the APS in Arizona as a smart grid analyst there. So welcome everyone. And so the plan is to just ask a few questions and then kind of halfway through open it up for Q&A so we have a good discussion with the audience. So my first question is, local governments are being constantly pushed to innovate, but what does innovation exactly mean to each of you? Does it come from an individual, or does it come from a collective? Is it big or is it disruptive? Or does it come in small steps for you? So maybe we start with Leah.
Sure, yeah, absolutely. I think, we all believe that innovation really should be based on saving taxpayer money and ratepayer funding and improving the lives of the citizens and making government more efficient. I think that's all very valid. But I think we really should be also considering the new generation and their quench for data and communication and expediency. And that's something that I think we should all be really looking at. And some of the ways that we solve that, and we'll talk more about this later, is high-speed internet access, fiber, apps, open data, instant feedback. The young generation wants instant feedback about everything. How are they doing? They want a lot of little trophies on their apps. You're doing great. You're smiley face. They want gamification to compete against others. And so I think these are all things that we should be looking at in government and in utilities. And you asked about innovation, and is that big or disruptive or is it small? I think it's really the sum of the parts. It's a lot of baby steps, and it's really surrounding yourself in an organization that really believes in innovation. It's really a cultural issue, and it's a community effort. We're fortunate in Riverside. We have 4 colleges and universities. We have CCERT, we have UCR, and we have CARB coming to town. And so I think we have just innovation everywhere, and so it's hard not to be innovative in Riverside.
Great. Barry, do you want to talk about what's innovative in San Francisco?
Sure. Well, I think to paraphrase the cliche slightly, I think necessity is the mother of innovation for a local government. That we have, big challenges that we face, and among them, it's one of San Francisco's. One of the goals that we really focus on, particularly the Department of Environment, is that our goal is to reduce emissions by 80% by 2050, similar to the state. And that was digested into some more, I think approachable and yet more ambitious sounding sub-goals that our overall climate action strategy is 0, 50, 100 routes. So just boiling it down to, we need to get to zero waste, to 50% of all trips within the city made by sustainable modes of transit, to 100% renewable energy, and to sequestering carbon into our soils and our urban canopy. And among those, the 100% renewable energy is definitely one of the most difficult. And as we also see the growth of the interest in distributed energy resources, the sustainable transportation goal and the 100% renewable energy goal strongly interact as we see the transition to electric vehicles. So with those ambitious ideas and the timeline of 2030 for meeting those goals, we need to get to 100% renewable energy, we need considerably greater energy efficiency. And we've definitely been adopting REACH codes in each of the last few code cycles, and done so, I believe, that more frequently than any other city, or maybe we're on par with Palo Alto at the moment. But we also see is that creates a challenge, that the state's zero net energy goals are absolutely fantastic and helpful motivators, and yet the path that the code is taking to approach those goals is causes structural challenges for us to actually adopt, to demonstrate that we can meet those objectives ahead of time. And also we need, if we're going to talk about zero net energy, that's fundamentally different than the energy code as a whole as it stands today. Zero net energy is an energy budget. You're describing it in the title, that you're going to get to a particular energy budget, and not just any old budget, but one of the most ambitious ones you could pick. And so one of the tools that we've been working on is, how do we actually complement the energy standards, which, because they're necessary and they're absolutely valuable for efficiency, with something that would provide a tool to navigate toward zero net energy. And so we've been working on the how to operationalize some research that was done by statewide codes and standards a few years ago, where they looked at create this idea of a zero energy performance index, so a fixed scale based on your building use, and 0 being defined in that scale as zero net site energy use, and 100 being an average building at the turn of the century. And so the trick is partly to do the analytic work to create a scale like that, but then also think about the infrastructure that needs to stand behind it, so you could have a fair and an equitably implementable tool, and also that it's potentially an enforceable complement to the prescriptive nature of the energy standards. So that's one example.
Is that something that could be replicated at other local governments as well?
We're definitely working on it with an eye toward, the first few years of research we did was San Francisco focused, but now this next phase of development we're beta testing, that's in partnership with other jurisdictions through the Bay Area Regional Energy Network. And then also we're sharing what we learn with, there's a international network, the Carbon Neutral Cities Alliance, of cities that have adopted similar goals. And so there's actually a lot of pathways for dissemination and peer review and input.
Great. Chris, do you have any thoughts?
So for me, innovation is really about the process of making things better. And Leah teed it up well earlier. My generation requires a lot more information, requires a lot more praise, that sort of thing. But I think one thing that my generation in particular needs is, thank you, is, we have this desire for innovation to happen, and we require it to happen quickly. And that's particularly challenging for large organizations. The utility, we've been in an industry that we try and analyze all of our risks before making any decision. So, we're a little bit hesitant to do any sort of transformational innovation. So what Edison's really trying to do going forward is lay the foundation for innovation to happen around us. So whether that be through standardization, through something like Green Button Connect My Data, which allows third parties to get data from customers and then they can chop it up however they want, present the findings to their customers so that they can drive whatever it is that the customers want, or whether that be on the wires side with allowing a poles and wire system where you can connect an electric vehicle or you can connect a solar PV system, and as that changes, we can adjust to that. So that's kind of from a company perspective how things are changing. From my personal perspective, what I'm really focused on the programmatic side is how do we make things simpler for the customer, and how do we empower the customer to be able to do the things that they want to do. So, it's about looking and making things more efficient, more spent more effectively, and also delivering greater energy efficiency and greenhouse gases. So in terms of your question about whether it be broad in scale or small steps, I think the larger the organization, the smaller steps that it takes. But I think if you have a top-down leadership buy-in on that, you can produce grand results at the end.
Great, thank you. So I think I'm going to change it up a little bit. I'll ask this next question, but I want you guys to think of the question as well, and after the panelists answer, we can get some answers from you guys in the audience. So what in your community or your organization that are you doing that is really bold and exciting? Do you have any examples of new projects or technologies? I know you gave one. I'm sure you have many other models that you can share. And then what are the lessons learned? And so when we go through the panel, but then I'd really love to open it up to the audience and hear from you your very innovative projects that you're doing, and we can share that. Want to go first this time, Barry?
Well, sure. I mean, I think the one that comes to mind that's most relevant here is, we've been doing it for a few years, but this idea that we would begin to make transparent energy use in commercial buildings and use that as a tool for motivation and for navigation has been a significant challenge to launch in California, where there are 15 communities now in the U.S. that have similar programs that are based on if you measure it, that enables you to manage it. And so this assembling energy use for a building is very straightforward in an owner-occupied building, and remains very challenging in a tenant-occupied space. And we've certainly learned a lot in taking a go at it, and found that as in the last 5 years, as our economy grew considerably for many reasons not related to the ordinance, and as commercial building property values increased by 80%, and total employment citywide increased by 11%. So we were using our buildings more intensively, and the economy was growing. There was a 2% reduction in gross energy consumption across the commercial sector. And that's not in any way entirely attributable to any one ordinance. There's an ecosystem going on of ratepayer investment, of financing, of codes, and of development of new technologies. But the idea that we would know which buildings really have the greatest opportunity for improvement, and have the opportunity to partner with them in those improvements, and to use that to inform policy in a way that also informs them, that's been an exciting project to work on.
Yeah. Barry and I go way back. We were working, when I was at the PUC, we worked on energy data together, and I think data is going to be a reoccurring theme, and it's so important to innovation.
Well, and if there were one thing that I would hope would, an idea that would come back, I think that you were ahead of your time in proposing the energy data center, that it definitely was this idea of there being a central body that is able to manage information in a consistent way about buildings' energy use across the state, and to use that for policy and program development, and also to make it more efficient, a lot of different energy efficiency services. It was such a radical idea that I think it didn't gain the traction that it might have, and I think we really should, as we try more and more efforts that are disparate to try to assemble energy usage data, we might give it another rethink. Would it be more efficient to have a wholesale approach?
Right. Slow and steady with the data. Chris, do you want to?
All right, yeah. So I want to talk about our strategic plan work. So I think most of the people in this room are fairly well aware of the strategic plan work that we fund, but for those of you who aren't, we have, for the past few years, been doing work towards the California's long-term energy efficiency strategic plan. And as part of that, we had two kind of different ways that we ran the program. One was through this solicitation fund, where we had $29 million, and that was allocated out to the various local governments through a RFP type process that was pretty burdensome, from the application perspective. Lots of deliverables. It was effective, but it was also a burden. We also had these embedded funds, which was a much smaller dollar amount, which was available to the cities and local governments through their partnership. And all of these funds were used to develop either codes or policies or procedures, energy action plans, utility management systems, things that promote energy efficiency. It's not necessarily energy efficiency implementation, but things that support that. So after the $29 million was kind of spent out, we decided to reassess where we are and see what the program should be going forward. So what we're rolling out, and it's going to be, we're going to start accepting applications today. So if anyone wants to apply for these funds, it's on, as we get the applications, we'll start doling out the money. But it's a three-tiered approach to strategic plan. So one of the things that we had was that local governments didn't feel like there was a strong path forward for what they should be doing with the strategic plan dollars. So we have three tiers now. The first tier is kind of for people that are just getting their feet wet, haven't quite done anything strategic plan before. So that one is greenhouse gas inventories and benchmarking of their facilities. The second, and that's available to anyone who's in a local government partnership for Southern California Edison. The second one is tier 2 projects. So that's really focusing on policies and codes. So these are a little bit more advanced and require a little bit more strength. So what we require for that is it's for our energy leader model, you have to be silver or above in order to apply for these funds. And then the last one, which I think ties in pretty well to this panel, is what we're calling innovation driver or tier 3 projects. So these are projects that are kind of in the vein of strategic plan work. They're policies or something like that that promote energy efficiency, but that haven't been done before, something that's new and novel. And so these ones will be available to anyone that has achieved a gold level or greater for SCE's energy leader model. And we think that that one will have a little more rigor to it. What we expect from that is that that one will be a little more, the application will be a little greater, that sort of thing, and the approval process will be a little more burdensome. And at the end of the whole thing, what we require is the white paper, so that what we learn from that innovation, we can then either build into our tier 1 and tier 2 projects, or we can spread throughout so that other people can start using that sort of thing. So that's kind of where we stand with regard to kind of things that we're rolling out.
How many applications do you expect, or how many local governments?
So it was $29 million for all of the embedded or the solicited funds, and then we had a much smaller amount for the embedded funds. So we're looking for kind of that Goldilocks sweet spot on this. So it's roughly $1 million a year. And so right now for 2016, we've got $560,000 that are available, and then it's going to be ongoing about $1 million a year. And it's not entirely clear what that'll work out to in terms of applications, but maybe, I don't know, 20 or 30, something like that.
Great.
It's impressive. I can't compete with giving away money, so you're surprised. But I think something that Riverside's been doing for a long time that's very bold is building out their fiber network for communications. We've got over 115 miles of fiber throughout the city, 80 square mile city, which is pretty amazing. And we started that in the 90s with an $11 million original capital investment. And we've been using it to connect all of our buildings, our substations, 86 locations. But now we're looking at how can we leverage this for economic development? How can we provide dark fiber to providers, communication providers? How can we help businesses get the speeds that they really need to run their businesses? And I think the most important part about having this foundation is it lays that foundation for the Internet of Things, where everything will have a chip. Everything's starting to have a chip. It's scary. And those things will be talking to each other and talking to us and talking to applications. So it all is based on communication. So I think we're well positioned for the Internet of Things. And according to Gartner, they're saying that there were 5 billion connected things in 2015, up 30% from the prior year. But in 2020, we're going to have 25 billion things connected on the Internet, which is about 3 per person in the world, but a lot of people don't even have Internet access. So a lot of people have a lot more than 3 devices now. In fact, for me, in my house, I was counting the number of devices that I have connected in my little Internet of Things, and I have over 17 devices. And I was thinking, what in the world? How did I get that many? And I was like, okay, wait a second. I've got my web-based irrigation controller. I've got my 2 smart thermostats. Where my daughter texts me at work and tells me, please turn down the heat. I mean, I think I've created a monster with that one. But I gave her the app, so she's good. She has her own app now. She can do it herself. But I'm monitoring my solar power production. I'm monitoring my electric car and to see, if it's charged and all of these things. I even have a scale that's connected. It's all connected, and some of it's starting to talk to each other in my own house. So I think the lesson learned here is, what are we going to do with all this data? How are we going to make sense of it? How are we going to secure it? And how are we going to keep it private? So that's something that I struggle in an IT environment every day. But we know this is coming, and we should all be really thinking about it and preparing for it. But it will make us greener citizens going forward. I know I'm becoming I'm a tree hugger, I think, tree hugger status, right? I should get a little award on my app. But I think it's just the sign of things to come, and it's really pretty exciting.
Great. So now I'd like to open it up to the audience. I hope you guys have some great ideas to share with everyone else. Don't stand me up here. Nothing? Yes. And then we should have microphones coming around right behind you.
Susan Freed, County of San Diego. I have been asking at this forum for years, if we're supposed to meet 2030 goals of energy efficiency in existing buildings by 2030, how do we know how to do that? I mean, everyone has that question, right? So what we're doing is we have just hired a consultant to help us create a portfolio plan with an eye to, our big hairy dogs, our medium-sized buildings, and our smaller ones. How are we going to treat these? And what is our first step? What's our next step? How do we parse them out into, do this with this kind of facility and do that with that kind of, and what's it going to cost? How long is it going to take? How should we approach this over the next 13 years? I have no idea what it's going to look like, but I think it's a great step. And when we get done with that, I'd love to share it, because honestly, does anyone else have an idea how we're going to do this?
Well, maybe Barry, do you have any words of advice?
I mean, I think that this is a time of a lot of experimentation. So I think there's a number of efforts that are in many ways thematically similar. The engineering company Siemens is working with us but a number of cities around the world to try out their city performance tool, and that's functions at least at the description level. It sounds a little bit similar to how you're working with a consultant. That they're looking at 73 different ways that you can change the infrastructure, including the built environments, and including insulating buildings or electrification of transit. So how would we prioritize given our emissions factor, our changes in likely emissions factor from electricity supply over the next 30 years, and other things that are both, we both don't know the exact answer to, but we have a very good idea of from the Renewable Portfolio Standard Law and other inputs. How could that inform pathways for improvement? And I think that's valuable that question has gotten straightforward enough that engineering firms are developing tools to just do that work, partly for relationship development. On another path, we are working with, and we were the ABAG through the Bay Area Regional Energy Network was recently awarded a Department of Energy grant to help us with energy efficiency targeting for small and medium commercial buildings. And the focus of that will be developing an inventory of small and medium commercial buildings around the Bay Area so that we could begin to build an asset model. What are the attributes of these buildings, and what is the best pathway for groups of buildings to go through upgrades? And in the absence of that information infrastructure, we wouldn't be able to take that systematic of approach in terms of outreach. So I think that there's a lot of the types of projects that Leah is talking about really do feed back into this development of it getting more as IT costs get lower, the range of things that we can get done with a dollar expands, and it does create a lot more opportunity for identifying and developing both efficiency and renewable energy projects.
So this particular example isn't in SE territory, but if it were, I mean, what resources does the utility have to help?
So, from my perspective, it's all about where technology and policy meet up. So what I would say is be involved in the discussions on the business plan development. In terms of resources that are available to you, utilize all of the energy usage information data that you can get your hands on. It's a challenge that we're all struggling through, right? And so to answer your question, I think it's a fight that we're going to have to just keep showing up every day to work and working towards. So I don't. That's it's not the answer you want to hear. you want a direct answer that this is how we're going to do it, but I don't know the answer.
Do you have anything else?
I just think look at what other cities are doing to address it and collaborate with other cities. I know I'm going to be talking about our plan and how we're trying to approach that momentarily. So I think just sharing ideas with other cities, finding out what's the best return on investment and what makes sense would probably be my recommendation.
Well, go ahead, and you, if you'd like to.
I'll wait.
Okay,
you have a question that teased me up for that.
All right. Anything else anyone would like to share about innovative projects that are happening in your jurisdictions? Yes, here.
Hi, this is Corey with the City of Calista. One project that we've had some experience with is working on community-wide competitions. Working with community-wide competitions, both with the Cool California competition as well as the Georgetown University Energy Prize. And I think that's definitely an area where you can really streamline your engagement with the residents and provide really direct benefits for some of the behavioral changes that are harder to ingrain and to get out into the community. And so one thing, I think our experiences have been good in the competitions that we've been in, but we're really excited about the CEC existing building plan and the community-wide competitions that might come out of there. And if there's a chance to kind of raise it up from a few kind of pilots in the Cool California Challenge to something that's really ingrained and has some more resources behind it to flush out that strategy a little bit.
I'm curious, what was the winner of the competition?
What was that?
What was the winner for the competition?
So we're currently in the Georgetown University Energy Prize. Last I checked, the #1 city was Huntsville, Alabama. We're 17th, and there's a few of the other California cities that are pretty well represented, but this is one of the lessons learned, I would say, is that baselines matter. In California, they're judging us, or our energy is measured against previous 2 years' energy usage, and I have a strong suspicion that our energy usage is probably a little bit lower than Huntsville, Alabama, putting us at a little bit of disadvantage. So, but still, regardless of where we end, I think it's the process of the competition and just the widespread engagement that you can really tap into a lot of civic pride and people's natural competitive instincts to really open the door for further conversations about energy efficiency.
Great. I think you're going to touch on gamification as well a little bit.
A little bit.
Yeah. Any other comments you want to share? Okay. With that, we'll continue with the program. So the next question is about diversity. California, of course, is a very diverse population, very diverse communities with different assets. All these different local governments and cities are very different and different challenges, different needs. So how can we better replicate some successful pilots that panelists have had while embracing this diversity and addressing very different local needs? So maybe I'll start with Leah.
Sure, absolutely. I think Code for America just exemplifies being able to really pilot something that works and then give it out to other cities. And we actually borrowed some code that was adopted from City of Oakland. They were doing an Adopt a Drain program, and they took their code from the City of Boston, who had an Adopt a Hydrant program, and all this source code was originally generated by Code for America. And I'm not working for them or anything, but I think they're a great organization. And so we got the code for free because we wanted to roll out an Adopt a Drain program where citizens could maintain drains for us, because we're getting ready for El Nino. Well, it never really came, but it's still amazing how how many people decided this was a great idea and adopted a drain. And we had 137 citizens that adopted 236 drains in our city, and our staff took that code from Oakland and we branded it and we rolled it out in about 48 hours and put it on our website, and we tested it, and then we launched it. And this was free code, so I can't really say there was a return on investment or how many drains, how much time we really saved. I really don't know those numbers. I just know we got the source code for free. So if we had one person sign up, that was a return on investment as far as I was concerned. And so I think there's a lot of opportunity around sharing things like sharing code, sharing data. I'm a big proponent of open data. We've got an open data portal on our city website, Engage Riverside. And I think, opening up your data that you're already creating internally, opening it up to the outside has a potential to crowdsource creativity to solve government problems that you may not even know you have. So mashing up data like from the county and from the city and other sources, GIS data or just maybe raw data, and putting it out there, it really can create correlations and patterns and show new things that we didn't know we even needed to solve. And so I think that's really the future. I think and with the Internet of Things, that's going to be even more compounded. So I think, hey, you just put it out there. It's better than waiting for a California Public Records request where you have to then go through and redact and figure it all out right then within the 10-day period versus let's do this all up front. What can we share now and be proactive about? Put it all out there, do all that redaction and get your attorneys to sign off on it one time and have it just flow out to the website and let people use it and do great things. And there's a lot of smart people out there doing really cool things with our data right now. And so we're really trying to do more of that going forward. I think that's a big deal.
I'm curious, what are the types of data that people are most requesting or most looking at? Do you know?
They look at 311 data, they look at 911 data, we have permitting data out there now. People are starting to develop around that, but a lot of crime data they like, but we're looking at what else can we open up, because we looked at the top most requested data sets and we started with those, calls for service, those types of things, but now we're looking at what else would be of interest. And so we're really going to be doing a lot more in that area going forward.
In the past few years I've been reading about New York City doing a lot on releasing data, and San Francisco. Are you learning a lot from other cities and sharing that with them as well?
I think we do. I mean, we talk on panels together, we give each other ideas. I think we're collaborating quite a bit on that, and there's more to come.
Right.
Yeah, I think that you might have been modest earlier when you mentioned that you didn't have the funds to give out. But if you have the data, you
Right.
give the knowledge to the community. Both there's the reduction in not only did you not have to invest in developing that app, but other communities don't have to develop the other code that we're certainly borrowing from others. Mm-hmm. But when we look at the growth of solar in California, among those inputs in that great story for rooftop solar have been, of course, Germans made their structural investment that helped the whole world. And it was so wonderful to have the CSI rebate and have that the assurance and reduce risk. But a third thread was data, right? That we began to actually open up enough data so that if you wanted to go into that business and target your services, you could understand how to do it and where to go. And I think that's an untapped opportunity still in efficiency, that we have put out more and more data about efficiency. I'm not saying there's none, but it isn't, I don't think, yet at the scale where it's systematically enabling entrepreneurs to find new opportunities to sell services to improve efficiency of buildings. And I think there's great work that we all do in terms of finding and developing projects and getting people to motivating building owners who wouldn't otherwise take action, and that's great. But the more minds we have working on the challenge, the better.
I mean, I think that's the hard thing about data is you have to put it out, and you don't know what the benefit will be until you actually see people using it, and you're like, oh, the linking data and seeing those benefits, and that really compels regulators to then allow more release of that data. But it's constantly being creative about what that data can do. Do you want to add anything, Chris?
Yeah, so I'm just going to make a couple plugs on the EE side of things. So as part of our strategic plan work, it was technically a pilot. So we developed a best practices document, best practices and lessons learned document. There's actually two of them. One was for the first two phases and one was for the third phase. And I know that the other utilities have also been working on documents. So that'll have everything that we've done strategic plan-wise. And it'll have kind of what worked for the various cities, what didn't work, what did they find that was useful. And we're going to kind of chop it up so you'll be able, if you're interested in, say, a REACH code, you'll be able to look at all of the cities that did a REACH code and go through that document and kind of see, who the contacts are, which cities did it, which cities have some good lessons learned. So we're working through just finalizing that draft and should have that out shortly. The other plug that I would make is for Jordan Decker, who's the best practices coordinator. She's got a great website. There she is. She's got a great website going, EE coordinator. And so I would highly recommend people utilizing that. That's where we'll probably be posting the best practices, lessons learned documents when they're finalized. I would also recommend, you guys are all here, so you understand the value of the forum, but participating in the partnerships is really helpful in kind of cross-pollinating and all of the various EE opportunities that are out there and seeing what various cities are doing. So those are all the plugs that I wanted to make for the various things that are important to me.
Could you clarify, Chris? So you mentioned that there had been the $29 million investment over, is it that 5 years?
Yeah, roughly.
So roughly $6 million a year, and then in addition, some additional funds that were competitively distributed to local governments or through the LGP, excuse me. And then you mentioned that it's now at $500,000. So is that a reduction in the overall rate of investment, or is there more?
So it kind of is a little bit of a reduction in the rate, and part of the reason for that is before a lot of the funding went towards utility management systems and trainings, and when we looked at the whole system, we said at the time we didn't have a means of giving data to any third parties. We didn't have a very good means other than them doing scissor forms, and that's kind of it was a painful process. So what we said is our green button Connect My Data went live in February, and that's probably the best avenue for anyone to get their data pushed out to any registered third party. And so we're not going to be funding utility management systems anymore for strategic plan work. And then the other thing we said was trainings. We already have trainings that are being done through our energy education centers and through statewide codes and standards. And so a lot of the trainings that we were doing through strategic plan work were kind of duplicative. So what we said is, why don't we bring the resources that the local governments need for the trainings into their partnerships through the energy education centers and the codes and standards work, and that would satisfy that. So really what we're talking about is focusing on the policies, energy action plans, that sort of thing. And so while it may look like it's a substantial decrease, it's going to be about $1 million a year going forward, and we think that that's probably sufficient to maintain. If we find that it's not sufficient to maintain, we'll reassess at that point. But
I'd like to open it up again. I mean, I'd love to hear if there are any local governments with kind of on a very opposite, on the end of the spectrum in terms of diversity, very unique situation, and opportunity to ask our panelists on advice or sharing, how you've taken a very unique circumstance in your jurisdiction to be successful. Yeah.
So I actually have a question for the diversity coordinators.
Oh, we got a microphone coming.
I have a question related to the availability of so much data. So data is a powerful tool, but it also can be really overwhelming and confusing. And so one thing I have been seeing, and thanks to Chris for mentioning the great work that the IOUs have been doing putting together these best practices reports, I've been somewhat involved in the review, and I think that they really do contain a lot of really helpful information that I think local governments will find very interesting. And one thing that I'm seeing in those reports, and also from talking to local governments across the state, is that utility data, energy data, performance data, building performance data is all really powerful, and local governments want it, of course. But there's also a challenge of capacity for folks dedicated to looking through this data, looking to find what are the key indicators that they're looking for, and also, so I feel like there's two parts of the chain. There's the what utilities can communicate to their cities and counties and regional governments to help share what the types of data that will help motivate action. And then also from the local government perspective, when they're looking at data, when they're trying to motivate community action, what can they communicate out to their communities that is the most effective? And I guess given the importance of data, I'm interested to hear if any of you have best practices that you could share about sort of what key metrics you find powerful, whether it's from the utility perspective sharing with local governments, or whether it's from the local government perspective sharing with the community.
could start with that. I think as far as, opening up data, we go by how often is a data set asked for, because then we know someone wants it for a specific reason and they're going to develop around it. And so that's really where we started. But I think standards is something that we really need to start focusing on. We probably need to have regional groups setting standards of data so that we're not kind of all going and doing our own thing, and then developers are having a hard time, making sense of what really is correlating. And so I think that's one area that we could really work further on in the future. And I think there are some efforts underway with some of like California Forward. I know they're trying to get some standards together, and I think more of that needs to be done.
I think it's an on-point question, and yet with regard to community energy usage data, we've not had an excess of data that made it difficult to manage. It's more likely that, based on the privacy requirements, that even getting to zip code +2 is only occurs on a very targeted basis with a lot of process behind it. So it's the limitation of obtaining data remains. And I actually think PG&E is doing a good job of being responsive to our requests for data, but within the framework of those privacy requirements, it's the asking process and then the receiving process are big bottlenecks that are unnecessarily cumbersome. Providing data to the community about how our own facilities are performing has also been key for our credibility. And there's been some investment necessary to digest that and communicate that in a meaningful way. But it also hasn't really been the source of being overwhelmed by energy usage information.
But it's coming, I think, as more and more data will be available.
It certainly could be. I mean, I think that the data about how data is available right now and the different paths for regulatory structures and ways of interacting with one another, that remains not opaque in the sense that it's complex enough that it feels opaque, right? That it's very difficult for any person to understand all the different pathways. And I do spend a fair amount of time just talking about that if we put our hat on, that we're within our contractual partnership, we have this level of data we have access to, but we can only use it while we're in that hat. And then if we put our hat on that we're doing our more normal government function, we have this level of data that we have access to, and we can use it for these purposes. And so that just assembling the knowledge of what are all those different hats one can wear is a significant lift in and of itself.
And that, from the utility perspective, so, my personal desire would be to allow anyone to have access to the energy, because I feel like we could chop it up every which way, but I'm not the one who gets to set the policies, right? So there's a whole privacy concern and people, and it's a legitimate concern, right? So what we have the data ruling, and with the ruling comes certain things, right? So we've got the EDRP process where you can go in and get community usage data. What I would recommend is, that process is time consuming, as you know, because you've probably been through it many times. But we do provide quarterly usage data for all zip codes. And that's available on each of the IOU's websites. It's quarterly.
If I could, sorry.
Yeah.
It's slightly better than that. You provide monthly usage data, but you publish on a quarterly basis.
Exactly, correct. And it's broken out by customer class, so residential, commercial, that sort of thing. So if you're in need for kind of general usage data, that's probably your best route to go. With regard to your personal usage data for your facilities, I think Green Button Connect My Data, just make another plug for that one, is the best avenue for it. In terms of being overwhelmed with data, so there's many tools that you can use to chop up the data. One in particular, though I don't work for the company or anything like that, but I think there's valuable tools out there like Tableau that can chop up vast quantities of data and visualize it in ways that you can then go and target what you particularly are looking for. So those are kind of my recommendations.
I think Socrata is another good example. The City of LA is using that, and we're always interested in that product as well. It's a good tool.
Yeah.
And I think that in this discussion between cities and utilities, there's also the challenge that as resource-constrained entities, the cities can often have a desire to have data fully digested and in the format that's most readily used immediately at that moment. And I think that's a fundamental challenge, that there's more there's definitely more that communities across the state and definitely we would love in terms of access to data. And yet there's the stepping up as well on our part, which is challenging to find the resource to do. But we need to be able to put data into context. We need to provide, I think, data about where buildings are located and how many of them there are. And that it's really the Reese's peanut butter cup of knowledge about the built environment depends on that peanut butter of the utility usage information. And if we lack that, it's definitely lacking. But also there's the chocolate that we need to put around it, put it in the context. And it's the two together. I think that's why this idea of a partnership is fundamentally helpful and is useful. That there actually are things that the utility also just systematically doesn't know, and you've been a lot of work's gone on in recent years, but yet to some extent, the base level view of the community from a government point of view is that there's greenhouse gas emissions are coming out somewhere. It's a zip code level, and some building types we know are probably more energy intensive than others. But then if we switch it around, the opacity of complexity for the utility is there's this big pile of energy meters, that we're sending bills to and getting money back from. But that still isn't really in the context of what's the technical potential of this building given this assets and this usage profile yet. And I think that it's really bringing together that information about the size and shape and form and use and components of buildings with the usage information is where we have the power to realize the answer to the question of how do we actually get to these 2030 type goals.
Yeah. I'll just share from the private sector. We at AMS, we probably have 15-minute interval and monthly billing data for 400 to 500 different customers that we've gotten authorization from the utility to have that data. And so it's a lot of data that we're dealing with. And we use Tableau. Tableau has been really great to look at large repositories of data, but then also that mapping function I think you were getting at, overlaying that data with maps, with parcel data about building characteristics. Is I imagine would be really powerful as well. And then we also work with companies like Utility API or Urginet that kind of make that green button data access a little bit easier. They go through the portal and get your authorization. So just a few other ideas. Any other questions or comments? Yes. When you say community data, you mean data for Chula Vista as a whole? Yeah. Or would some of that zip code level data?
It could. There are the aggregation rules and that sort of thing that limit what you can get.
Our border splits a zip code.
Yeah.
Some data isn't really applicable for us. And to be fair, SDHD is working on getting us common code data, but we're trying to do our 2014 greenhouse gas inventory, and we haven't been able to do that yet.
Yeah, I'm definitely not saying that the all of our data needs are met either, but there is a balance between, and I'm not sure that's the limiting factor. I think it's the rule set, and it still sounds like there's a combination of the rule set, and then there's also, the rules as complex as they are still kind of a high-level summary, and the protocol by which they're determined, how they're interpreted, that's not yet transparent to us. So if you do an inventory and when you do get greenhouse gas related data from the utility, we don't know necessarily what's been omitted, right? And so when the rules, that became an opportunity recently that was highlighted, that when the rules changed, that really showed that interpretation of the privacy rules had a big effect on what was omitted, and that could be a contributor to some of the good news that we saw in the opening plenary, unfortunately, that that the if you just get less information about gas because more is omitted and you don't know, you don't have validation really of what is in there and is not, that's fundamentally not complete data about your community. And we definitely have failed so far to connect between, for greenhouse gas, some of the data that's omitted that's critical is natural gas consumption by facilities that have exceptionally high natural gas consumption. And that sounds logical out of context, except that in the other sphere of if you're doing emissions reporting to CARB, and for some other purposes, there are requirements to actually publish the greenhouse gas emissions for those same facilities. And so we aren't yet applying what's called the uninformative principle in privacy, that if something's already published, there isn't really a point in continuing to attempt to protect it. And that's really a fundamental idea that we need to come back to, is how do we acknowledge when a particular piece of information is already public and use that to help ensure that our greenhouse gas emissions data in particular is more comprehensive. And then program participation data, we just haven't been seeking it for that exact purpose. So I don't have we have the ability to have a thorough idea of what our partnership is doing, but we actually don't have community-wide overall program participation data in any detail.
So I think we're close to the end of the session. I'm going to end with one last question that I think might be relevant to a lot of people out there. There's never enough resources to go around, and so I'm sure you have to leverage in local governments every possible dollar with very aggressive goals that you're facing. So where do you see the greatest opportunity for innovation to save energy, reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and build that long-term resilience to climate change? Minister?
Sure. So I think for Riverside, it's our new Riverside Restorative Growth Print. It's a little bit of a mouthful, but it's a project that combines two plans to maximize the economic benefits inherent to addressing climate change. And so the two plans are Economic Prosperity Action Plan layered with the Climate Action Plan. And it's pretty amazing. It's on our website. You can look it up and research it. But basically, the goal is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions to 49% below baseline by 2035, and inspire entrepreneurial opportunities and job creation around that plan. And also, it has plans to develop a tracking tool, tracking mechanism, really establishing policies and priorities and informing, engaging the stakeholders. I'm reading some of these bullet points from the plan itself. But one major project that we have that's underway that's in line with this plan are the LED, it's the LED streetlight project, which is a $15 million project that's just starting. So we're just hiring somebody to do a further evaluation for us so that we can get started. But we're looking at replacing all of our old high-pressure sodium lights with LED lamps. And these lights have a 20-year life cycle as compared to 4 to 7 years of the older systems. So we're expecting an estimated lamp payback of 5 years. So in 5 years, all of our lamps will have paid for themselves when we invest in this new technology. And then about a 15-year payback for the entire project. And the estimated annual energy cost savings are about $1 million a year. And then in maintenance, it's about $367,000. So that's one of the many projects that will be unveiled under this new plan. And I think this is great for Riverside. It will save money and allow us to spend our funding more wisely, but it's also great for the environment. We're looking at 375,000 kilowatt hour savings, and that's about 51 Riverside homes that would be saved in energy every year. So we're excited about this, and I think it's just kind of the beginning of a lot of other ways that we're going to meet those goals going forward.
Right.
Well, I guess I'm bullish on the things that I've mentioned, of a greater and in fact even open data about building energy consuming assets, about having a rating that really helps us navigate towards zero net energy. But I think, if you want the biggest thing, it is that we have this growth of networks, and among them also the Local Government Sustainable Energy Coalition, but peer-to-peer networks where we do exchange ideas and also collaborate to foment change. And I don't think we wouldn't even have, the partnership programs wouldn't be at the state they were if we hadn't been able to begin to work and network together to push for that, both as a group and in our relationship with the utilities. And by the same token, being able to have exchanges with communities across the country and around the world has brought a lot of ideas to us, and we certainly like and enjoy sharing with other communities in California.
Great. Chris, do you
And then
have
from
some
my
examples?
perspective, I think we've talked about data enough today, but I think there's a lot of value in utilizing the data to find where your resources should be used. I think we also, in our new strategic plan model, are giving some bonus points if you can come in with other resources. So leveraging stuff like the cap and trade funds or something like that, you'll get a little bit of a bump so that we can score you better for the innovative type of work. And then the other thing I would highlight is revolving funds. So, when it's all part of the general fund and you're doing capital work, you're competing against all of the other things. But setting up a revolving fund where the incentives from the utility go into this fund, that the fund can only be used for energy efficiency type of activities, then provides the impetus for future EE work. So those are the kind of things that I would like to highlight.
Great. So with that, I hope you don't mind that I put the Q&A in the middle of the session. With that, I'll close the session. Thank you. Do you guys want to say anything else?